Star Trek The Original Series, Season 1, Episode 21, Return of the Archons. This was suggested to me by my friend Will Stape, and Will actually wrote a couple of episodes of Star Trek, The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and he's got a great podcast called The Sci-Fi Guy on Substack, and he recently started uploading to YouTube as well. So check him out. I'll leave all his links in the description below. And Will compared this episode to the Purge franchise, and I never noticed the connection before, but he's right. There's a big similarity, and Wikipedia confirms it, at least as much as Wikipedia is capable of confirming anything. The influence of Star Trek on pop culture cannot be understated.
Star Trek changed everything. And aren't these conventions wonderful?
But I also think it might be the partial inspiration for an aspect of another famous franchise, and I'll mention that when we get to it. But I think that's enough of an intro. I think we should just dive right in. The episode opens up with Sulu and a crewman named O'Neill on a planet named Beta 3. Seems like a lot of thought went into the naming of that planet. And they're in disguise. The people of this planet apparently dress as though it's some kind of Charles Dickens story, which is kind of fitting, because they're being chased by a couple of ghosts of Christmas future. And I say chased because it's technically true, but they're walking after them very slowly. Sulu and O'Neill could easily just run away from them, but they can't, because they're waiting for the Enterprise to beam them up. And apparently, that can't be done while you're in motion, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And if they could just put enough distance between themselves and the Grim Reaper dudes, they could probably just beam up safe and sound, no problem. Which is kind of what O'Neill decides to do. He keeps running, while Sulu waits to get beamed up. And it takes a bizarre amount of time. It takes forever, with no explanation. And one of the Grim Reaper-looking dudes zaps Sulu with his little zappy stick. And when he finally gets beamed up, he seems high as fuck. He looks at Kirk and says, "You're not of the body." And he keeps going on about someone named Landru. And after the credits, the captain's log reveals that they are looking for a starship called the Archon, which disappeared 100 years ago. I don't know why it's suddenly the Enterprise's responsibility to look for this long-lost starship, but whatever. After the Sulu fiasco, Kirk decides to beam down with Spock, McCoy, and 3 red shirts. And it looks like they've arrived in a very small town. The budget for this was obviously close to nothing. And they speak to some of the locals. This fucking freakazoid asks if they've come for the festival. And he suggests that they get a room at the nearby hotel because it's almost the red hour. And by almost, he means 30 seconds. The clock strikes 6, and everyone starts losing their fucking minds. The women go nuts. The men get violent and start smashing windows and shit. It's madness. You'd think the Lakers won the fucking Super Bowl or some shit. And this mindless violence will go on for the next 12 hours. I mean, it's the Purge. It's essentially the Purge. And Kirk and company take shelter in the nearby hotel, and they find some relatively normal individuals. The owner of the hotel is a guy named Redger, and he and the others question Kirk and wonder why they're not all going nuts like everyone else. Kirk says they're from out of town, which is kind of the understatement of the year. And they suspect that Kirk and his comrades are not of the body, but they give them a room anyway. And they wait until the next morning when the festival ends. And when the hotel guys realize that they didn't partake in the festival, they once again accuse them of being not of the body. And some more Grim Reaper dudes show up, and they're known as the Lawgivers, which of course instantly reminds me of Planet of the Apes. And the Lawgivers are the enforcers for whoever this Landru guy is. And they order Kirk and his men to come with them to be absorbed. That's the term for whatever it is that happened to Sulu and the rest of the people on this planet. And Kirk says you can tell Landru to go fuck himself. Okay, he didn't exactly say that, but that was basically the Cliff's Notes. And the lawgivers don't know how to respond to this. They aren't used to disobedience, so they just kind of freeze. And Kirk grabs one of their zappy sticks, and Spock examines it, and he says it's just a hollow tube with no mechanism, which seems highly unlikely, because 2 minutes ago, they used it to cast some fucking Patronus charm on one of the hotel dudes, and it turned him into a newt. And he did not get better. Tragic. And Redger decides to help him out for some reason. He says he knows a place where they can hide from Landru and his lawgivers, and he leads them out of the hotel, and everyone in the street is back to normal. No more festival. But suddenly the people stop what they're doing, and they freeze for a moment, almost as if they're receiving new orders. And then they begin to chase down the crew. Kirk and Spock stun some of them, and one of them turns out to be O'Neill, the crewman who was with Sulu at the beginning of the episode. They pick him up and take him with them. And they take cover in their own private dungeon. It's cozy, and Redger takes out a lamp to brighten things up. And Spock marvels at it. He says it's very advanced technology. I mean, it's just a lamp. It's a cube-shaped lamp. I mean, you could probably buy one of those things at Spencer's Gifts in the 90s. Let's not get nuts. And Redger starts explaining a few things. He says long ago, when the Archons came, that's what they call the crew of the starship Archon, they opposed Landru. And many were killed and even more were absorbed. He also says that Landru pulled their ship out of the sky. And of course, that's exactly what's happening to the Enterprise right now. Scotty contacts Kirk and tells him that they will hit the atmosphere in 12 hours. So it's a very slow pull, apparently. And they seem to be doing it with heat rays, whatever that means. I have no idea how that works. And suddenly, Landru shows up, or at least a projection of him. And he looks like if Vanilla Ice had a baby with Billy Idol. And Landru says they will be absorbed, and that their individuality will merge into the unity of good. Almost sounds a little bit like the Borg, doesn't it? We got a little bit of a collective situation going on here. And they get headaches and pass out. And when they wake up, they discover that their phasers are gone and McCoy has been absorbed. He's high as fuck right now, and he goes on about peace and tranquility and all that good stuff. And Spock talks to Kirk and says that the lawgivers reacted to Kirk's defiance earlier like a computer that was being fed insufficient or contradictory data, as though they have been programmed. And the lawgivers show up again. They take Kirk and Spock to be absorbed, just like McCoy was. And Kirk also calls McCoy Doc a couple of times, which is very fucking bizarre. I can't explain that. But anyway, it seems like Kirk and Spock are about to be brainwashed like McCoy and the others. But a guy named Malpron explains that he's part of an underground resistance, and he gives Kirk and Spock back their weapons and tells them to fake being absorbed. So they both have to walk around with this fuckwit smile on their faces for a while and say things like peace and tranquility. And I have no idea why this Malpron couldn't prevent McCoy from being absorbed. I guess it wasn't his duty shift yet. And Kirk says that Landru has to be stopped. And Spock says, what about the Prime Directive? And Kirk correctly says, that only applies to worlds where the people are growing naturally. And that's obviously not happening here, so anything is fair game. And a couple of lawgivers show up again, and Kirk and Spock knock them the fuck out, which is surprising because 2 minutes ago, Spock was saying how powerful and dangerous the lawgivers are, despite never showing any real power at all. And Spock actually throws a punch to knock one of them out, instead of using the Vulcan neck pinch. And Kirk jokes and says, isn't that a little old-fashioned? And we never get any kind of an explanation as to why Spock did that instead of using the neck pinch. But anyway, they dress up like the lawgivers, and Malpron takes them to see Landru. And the projection of Vanilla Idol shows up, and Kirk shoots a hole in the wall, and it reveals a computer. The computer neutralizes their phasers and says it will do the same to Kirk. It also says that it's Landru. And Landru was apparently a guy that existed 6,000 years ago. And he programmed this computer to guide the society in this way of mindless peace and tranquility. But there's no free will or individuality, and there's no growth. The society is totally stagnant. And it's because the machine controls their minds. Now that kind of reminds me of Mass Effect. Mass Effect is an amazing sci-fi video game series. If you've never played it, you should play it. And in the story of Mass Effect, there are these ancient machines called Reapers that have the ability to control the minds of certain people. It's called indoctrination. And so it's called indoctrination instead of absorbed, but it's essentially the same thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching, but Star Trek was certainly an influence on Mass Effect. There are a lot of other similarities. And I think maybe this episode was just one other influence.
Star Trek changed everything.
Anyway, Kirk makes Landru short-circuit with a few contradictory statements and questions. He basically convinces Landru that it is evil, and of course evil must be destroyed in this society. That's one of its main directives. And it destroys itself. I mean, that's all it takes. It only took one guy to ask it a few questions for it to fucking explode. He also does the same exact thing to the Nomad probe in The Changeling. It's a bit of a Kirk maneuver, outwitting these dumbass machines. And everyone who was absorbed is now back to normal. Kirk literally says, well, you guys are on your own. Okay. But it does seem like they're leaving some Starfleet personnel behind to help the people get back on their feet. I mean, who cares? There's like 40 people in this town. It's not exactly a society. But whatever. They beam back to the Enterprise and the episode ends. It's a decent episode, but I don't love it. There are a lot of vague things about it and things that I feel aren't properly explained or expanded on. I mean, there's one scene where Kirk tells Scotty to put a guard on Sulu, and then nothing happens. I don't know why there wasn't a guard on him anyway, but after the opening scene, we never even see Sulu again until he's back to normal at the end. And they never explain what the purpose of the festival is. We assume it's like the Purge in a sense that it lets people blow off steam for 12 hours so they can be these docile, obedient, mindless drones the rest of the time. But it's never stated or explained at all. It's just very strange. But anyway, that's about all I got for now. Let me know what you thought of this one. And thanks again to Will for the suggestion. And until next time, take it easy.